Hey guys, Cronus Falls here, and today I'm going to be talking to you about champions who can fill the decreased defense role in your clan boss roster. Now there are quite a few champions that do the decreased defense, and I'm going to be going over quite a few of them today, but definitely not all of them, considering that there are quite a few. Not all of them are good in this role, and a lot of the ones I'll be talking about today aren't necessarily the best, but I think they're at least viable. So let's go ahead and get started in the rare category. So I'll be going over ones that I think from the bottom to top as far as their category goes. So the first one that I mentioned will be the one I think is probably the worst in the category that I'm mentioning. And then I'll be going on to the best in the category. So I'll do worst to best in rares, then worst to best in epics, and so on and so forth. And like I said, not every champion will be included. So let's go ahead and check this out. So we're going to go ahead and start in rare, and there are really only 3 champions that I think could really fill this role for you. So we're going to be starting in Barbarians with War Maiden. Now War Maiden is going to be an early game option for a lot of people. She is a champion that a lot of people use in the early game for arena as a decreased defense champion in general. She's great in dungeons, and so if you have her, you've invested in her, she can definitely work in this slot for you. So on her A3 here, she attacks all enemies, has a 75% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. This books up to a 100% chance on a 3-turn cooldown. So pretty decent. She is an attack-based champion, which is a little unfortunate, but she can absolutely do it for you. She can also has a 30% chance of placing a 2.5% poison debuff for 1 turn. So a little bit of poison, not bad. She can definitely fill that spot. But next we're going to move on to Fleshmonger and the Skinwalkers. So Fleshmonger is one of the newer champions here, and he actually has a 3-hit A1, which is very nice. And then on his A3 here, he attacks all enemies, has a 50% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. This books up to a 75% chance. So I think he and War Maiden can both fill this slot around the same effectiveness. He will not be as likely to get the decreased defense up for you, but the 3-hit A1 allows him to use Giant Slayer, which is definitely nice. Also on his A2 here, he places a 25% increased attack and 15% increased crit rate buff on himself, and grants an extra turn. He is an attack-based champion as well, so I think he and War Maiden can both come into that slot and do alright for you. War Maiden might actually be slightly better because it's a 100% chance on here, but either one of them will be able to do it fine for you early game. And then we're going to go into the Undead, and we are going to look at Grave Chill Killer. So Grave Chill Killer, I talked about her in my Poisoner video, but she can also bring a decreased defense. So she attacks 1 enemy, has a 75% chance of placing a 30% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns, or a 75% chance of placing a 60% instead if the target is under a poison debuff. So these book up to a 100% chance on a 3-turn cooldown, and you should typically have a poison up. She does do poison on her A1. You do want to pair her with another poisoner though, especially like a Frozen Banshee would be great. And she can come in here and reliably keep that decreased defense of 60% up for you. So I think she is the best one in this category to come in. She has a lot of other utility for clan boss with the poison, and she can get the big version up very consistently as long as you have poisons up. So Grave Chill Killer comes out at the top of the rare category. Let's go ahead and move on to epics. So at the bottom of the list, we're looking at Dark Aethel here. So Dark Aethel only makes the list because on her A1, she attacks 1 enemy 2 times and has a 50% chance when booked of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. So that's pretty decent. I mean, on an A1, getting decreased defense is solid. The rest of her kit is not at all useful for clan boss. She's not going to be getting this increased speed because she's not killing stuff. So that's just basically it for her. And a lot of these epics you'll see are only on this list because they do it on the A1. So like the next one here, Defiled Sinner, same deal. He attacks 1 enemy, has a 50% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns before attacking. So he does get a little bit extra damage in there. And this part doesn't really matter for clan boss. The rest of his kit in general doesn't really matter for clan boss because he's not killing enemies. Attacking all enemies doesn't matter on Clan Boss, so that's just kind of it for him as well. Next, we'll go on to the Orcs, and we are looking at Bone Keeper. So Bone Keeper, same deal, attacks one enemy, has a 50% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. And that's pretty much it as well. I mean, she can do a little bit extra damage, but all 3 of those guys are filling pretty much the same exact role. Cage Breaker and the Ogres tribes as well. Let's see, where's that? Right here. So Cage Breaker is, I think, this guy? Yeah, Cage Breaker. So again, on the A1, 55% chance when booked to placing 60% decreased defense. And the rest of his kit, again, doesn't matter at all for Clan Boss, but he can come in there and just get that decreased defense if he's someone you have and you need that role. Next, we'll be looking at Necro Hunter from the Knights Revenant. So let's see, it's this guy right here. On his A1, attack one enemy 2 times. Each hit has a 50% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. That books up to a 65% chance, which is pretty solid. 65% chance 2 times. You're way more than likely going to get it. And then this one doesn't matter for Clan Boss. He does put a perfect veil on himself, which is a little interesting. He'll take less damage from the Clan Boss, so that is a little bit of added utility for him, which is why he makes it a little higher on the list. Then we're going to be looking at Hexia back in the Undead. So Hexia right here, on her A1, attacks one enemy, has a 35% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. Chances to place this debuff increase by 10% per debuff placed on this champion. So this doesn't matter too much. You might get 1 debuff placed on her, which would be an extra 10%, which just kind of brings her up in line with the rest of the people with the A1. On her A2 here, attacks one enemy, grants an extra turn, and places a 50% increased attack buff on the champion for 2 turns if the attack kills an enemy. Doesn't matter for Clan Boss. And then this one here attacks one enemy, heals this champion by 15% of damage inflicted. The heal increases by 10% for each dead enemy, places a 30% increased speed buff on the champion for 2 turns. So she makes it a little bit higher as well, because she does put increased speed on herself, and she does heal herself a little bit on this A3. That's it for Hexia. Then we're going to go into the Barbarians, and we are going to be looking at Vala. So Vala is a newer champion, and she has, I believe on her A2 here, removes all shield buffs on all enemies, then attacks all enemies, has a 50% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff on all enemies for 2 turns when booked. This is on a 3-turn cooldown. It is on an A2 with only a 50% chance, so it's not the best. She can definitely come in there and do it though. She decreases damage received by the champion by 15% while under a shield buff. And she does place a shield buff on herself for 3 turns equal to 20% of her max HP. Also places a 60% increased defense buff on herself for 3 turns and fills the champion's turn meter by 50%. So she does get some turn meter boost. She can get out there and do it. Her chance is a little low, but I still think she deserves to be right here in the middle of this list. So let's go ahead and move on to Aina. So Aina is also a barbarian, and she's a little bit better in that on her A2 here, she attacks one enemy and has a 100% chance when booked of placing a weaken debuff for 3 turns. So weaken is a very good extra utility on her to go along with her A3 here, which attacks one enemy. Before attacking, has a 100% chance when booked of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 3 turns, which is very good. Heals this champion by 10% of the damage inflicted, so a little bit of built-in lifesteal. The problem with this ability is it's on a 5-turn cooldown. If it were on 4 turns, she'd be great. But that being said, not bad. So she makes it in here, again, right towards the middle of the list. So next we're going to be going on to the Lizardmen. We're going to be looking at Jarang. He's one of these two. There we go. Got it right. So Jarang here, he on his A3 attacks 3 times at random, has a 50% chance of placing a 50% decreased attack debuff and a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. So that books up to a 75% chance. And decreased attack and decreased defense are 2 of the most important debuffs you can have on the Clan Boss. So he makes it up here because he brings that extra decreased attack utility. His aura here only works in dungeons, so we're not too worried about that. His A1 will ignore 25% of target's defense, so it can hit decently hard. And the A2 really doesn't matter at all for Clan Boss. So that is Jarang. Let's go ahead and move on to the Sacred Order, where we will be looking at Frostbringer. So Frostbringer, she can attack 2 times at random on her A1, has a 15% chance, but it is a, 45% chance of placing a 100% heal reduction debuff for 2 turns. So that's not particularly useful for the Clan Boss. But on her A2, attacks 3 times at random, places a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns if the target has a heal reduction debuff. So she needs to have the heal reduction up. If you pair her with someone else who places it, this will be a lot more consistent. And that will help you to get the heal reduction up. And the reason that she makes it higher onto this list is because of her A3 here, which places a 30% increased speed and 50% increased attack buff on all allies for 2 turns. This is on a 4-turn cooldown, so kind of slow, but increased speed is very nice. Increased attack can also be good if you do have some attack champions on your team, make them do a little bit more damage. And her aura here only affects dungeons, so we're not too worried about that. So that's Frostbringer. Now let's go ahead and take a look at Towering Titan in the Ogren tribes. So Towering Titan actually brings a fair amount to the Clan Boss. On his A1 here, he attacks 1 enemy, has a 55% chance when booked of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. That's a pretty solid A1 there. And on his A3, he places a 60% increased defense buff on all allies for 2 turns, which is very nice. Then places a 15% continuous heal buff on this champion for 2 turns, as well as a shield buff on this champion equal to 30% of their max HP for 2 turns. So he's got a lot of utility in here. Increased defense on everyone is very good. He also helps himself out a little bit to survive. He's not typically going to be paired with Cagebreaker, but if you do bring Cagebreaker in with him, then you can get this as well, which will transfer 50% of the damage inflicted on Cagebreaker to him, so it's basically an ally protect. And his aura here is HP in all battles by 25%, which is pretty decent. So Towering Titan comes up towards the top of the list because he does have a fair amount of utility outside of the decreased defense as well. So next we're going to be getting into back the orcs, and we're going to be looking at Zargala. So Zargala is actually surprisingly good. She does bring a weaken on her A1. It is a 50% chance of a 25% weaken, which is pretty solid. And her A3 here attacks all enemies 3 times. After the first hit, has a 75% chance when booked of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff on all enemies for 2 turns. That is on a 4-turn cooldown, so not the greatest, but decreased defense and weaken is pretty solid for her. She also brings an ally accuracy aura. She is an attack champion, so that is a little bit unfortunate, but I still think she belongs closer to the top of this list because she can put out some serious damage. She can get that decreased defense for you, and she can bring a weaken. So now let's get into kind of the top 4 that I think are actually really solid to bring into the Clan Boss for these roles. These are ones that if you have them and don't have a better option per se, these ones I think would absolutely come in. I think these are definitely top tier as far as epics go, and there aren't a whole lot of legendaries that do better. So the first one we're going to be looking at is Stag Knight, and he is in the Banner Lords. So Stag Knight, on his A2 here, attacks all enemies, has a 70% chance, 100% or 95% chance when booked of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff and a 50% decreased attack debuff for 2 turns. This is very solid on a speed team. You can get it to 100% with the Sniper Mastery. And if you can get him going 3 times for every 2 times the Clan Boss goes, you can keep these up indefinitely. I will say it's a little difficult to get to that kind of speed differential, and so that is why Stag Knight comes up slightly under our next one, which is going to be in the Dark Elves. We are looking at Madame Ceres. Now Madame Ceres, very similar to Stag Knight, she removes all buffs from enemies, which is cool. She does not hit with this ability, however, like he does. But she places a 50% decreased attack debuff and a 60% decreased defense debuff on all enemies for 3 turns. This is on a 4-turn cooldown. So it's a little easier to get her to go 4 times for every 3 times the clan boss goes. It's a 4/3 ratio versus a 3/2 for Stag Knight. And that's why she comes out a little bit ahead for me. She does not do as much damage as Stag Knight does, that's for sure. But she is one of the only people who can absolutely keep it up 100% of the time. She is void, and this doesn't hit, so either way, it cannot be a weak hit. So basically all you have to worry about is getting resisted, and you want to build her with high accuracy anyways. So she is definitely top tier at this role. It's definitely best in a speed team. She's not going to do well for you in a counterattack team. That being said, I do think she's absolutely top tier to bring into clan boss if you don't have someone with a decrease attack A1. So with that kind of utility, she's definitely towards the top of this list as far as epics go. One that I do think is slightly better just in the decreased defense department though is Crystal Jarl. Rearguard Sergeant here. So Rearguard Sergeant on our A1 attacks one enemy, has a 50% chance when booked to placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. So she can keep this up very consistently, especially on a counterattack team. A1 can do it very well. She also on her A2 brings a decreased attack, so she attacks all enemies, has a 75% chance when booked to placing a 50% decreased attack debuff for 2 turns. That's on a 3-turn cooldown, so pretty solid. Also heals her by 25% of damage inflicted, which is nice. On her A3, she places a 50% ally protection buff and a 15% continuous heal buff on all allies except this champion for 2 turns. So as you can see, she's got a lot of utility: ally protection, continuous heal, defense down, attack down, and her aura can even be good, which increases force ally HP in all battles by 33%. It's not as good as all allies HP, but still pretty solid. So I think Rearguard Sergeant definitely takes number 2 on the epics list. Finally, for the number 1 spot, we're going to be coming up here into the high elves to look at Tayrel. So Tayrel, as you all know, brings a decreased attack on his A1. Attacks one enemy 2 times. Each hit has a 40% chance of placing a 50% decreased attack. That's a 50% chance when booked for 2 turns. Damage inflicted is proportional to defense. So decreased attack, definitely one of the most important debuffs. Well, actually the most important debuff, hands down, on the clan boss. So he brings that very consistently on his A1. And on his A2 here, attacks all enemies, has a 100% chance when booked of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns, and the rest doesn't really matter. For a clan boss, he is absolutely solid. He can keep up decreased defense pretty well. It's on a 4-turn cooldown, so not quite as often as some other champions on here. But with the decreased attack that he brings, as well as this aura, all ally defense in all battles by 25%, Tayrel is definitely topping this list as the best decreased defense champion in the epic category. So let's go ahead and move on to legendaries then. So we're going to go ahead and start in the sacred order here. And we are going to be looking at Abyss. So Abyss on her, her A2 here, attacks all enemies, has a 50% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns, books up to 75% chance on a 3-turn cooldown. Not amazing. She doesn't really bring a whole lot else to the clan boss, but she can do the decreased defense, so she is an option for you if you have her. Next, we're going to be moving on to the Undead Hordes, and we are going to be looking at Bloodgorged. So Bloodgorged on his A1 here, attacks one enemy 2 times, has a 55% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. This books up to a 75% chance, which is pretty solid on an A1. He can definitely keep that up for you. He is an attack champion, so he can go down pretty easily. He also hits very hard on his A3 here, so he can bring some damage. And this one doesn't really matter so much, but he's towards the bottom of the list. He can keep it up for you and do some damage, so he definitely has some utility here. Let's go ahead and move on to the Dark Elves. We'll be looking at Ghostborn. Where is he? There we go. So Ghostborn here on his A3, attacks all enemies, has a 75% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff. That's a 100% chance when booked for 2 turns. This debuff cannot be resisted, so that's very nice. places a 50% increased attack buff on all allies for 2 turns. That's pretty solid. So he brings some utility. He cannot be resisted. It is on a 4-turn cooldown, which is a little low, but he can definitely fill this role for you if needed. He is a support champion, so he's got decent HP as well as defense and speed. So all in all, pretty decent. Can definitely come in there and do that for you. Next, we're going to be going on to the Banner Lords, and we are going to be looking at Baron. So Baron here on his A2 attacks one enemy, places a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. This debuff is guaranteed, which is very cool. Has a 20% chance of unlocking a secret skill, Sky Piercer, for 1 turn. This is on a 3-turn cooldown, so he can absolutely keep it up pretty well for you. 2 turns on a 3-turn cooldown is not bad at all. Can't be resisted. He is void, so you can't hit weak anyways, and even if you could, it is guaranteed. So other than that, I mean, he basically just does damage. He's got this Sky Piercer ability, attacks all enemies, deals pure damage, so he's ignoring all defense, will ignore shield and block damage. Doesn't really matter for clan boss, but still very strong, does a decent amount of damage for you. And he can increase ally attack in all battles by 33%, which isn't super helpful in clan boss, but he is absolutely capable of filling that role for you. So now let's go ahead and move on to the Knights Revenant. And we are going to be looking at Tomb Lord. So Tomb Lord on his A3 here, Blight. It is on a 5-turn cooldown, which is definitely pretty slow, but not the worst thing in the world. He has a 100% chance of placing a 50% decreased attack and a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. So he brings the decreased attack and decreased defense. That's why he earns a place a little bit higher up on this list. And it is on a 5-turn, so he would have to be a backup decreased attack, absolutely. But he is pretty solid to come in here. He also brings poisons on his A2, 2 5% poisons. He's not going to be your main poisoner. He's probably not going to be your main attack down. May not even be your main decreased defense. But his kit is just good enough that I think he can absolutely come in there and support your team in a lot of different ways. He's also a support champion, so high HP. Defense actually a little low, less than 1,000, but not too bad. And decent speed of 99. So now we're going to go ahead and move on to the Dark Elves, and we are going to look at Ray. So Ray here on her A1 attacks all enemies, has a 50% chance when invoked, placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. So that absolutely can just come in and keep it up for you, especially on a counterattack team. You just hit with the A1, get the decreased defense, nothing more to it. Other than that, she just does a lot of damage, like this one here. Attacks all enemies, inflicts 50% more damage against targets under debuffs. So the clan boss should always be under debuffs for you, so just some damage. Her aura only works in dungeons, but she can definitely come in there and do it as well. So next we are going to be looking in the Skinwalkers, and we are going to be going to Coronar. So Coronar here is an HP champion, very high base HP, okay base defense, not the greatest, and okay base speed at 99. Basically what we're looking at here though is on his A3, attacks all enemies, places a 50% decreased attack debuff on all enemies for 2 turns, and a 60% decreased defense debuff on targets under decreased attack debuffs. So basically he's going to come in here, he's going to decrease attack, he's going to decrease defense. It is on a 4-turn cooldown, so it can't be your main decreased attack, but still pretty solid. I think he does do a little bit better than Ray as far as total utility. On his passive here as well, counterattacks when hit by enemies under decreased attack, decreased defense, or decreased speed. The decreased speed really doesn't work against the clan boss, but also on his A2 here, has a 75% chance of placing a provoke on all enemies for 1 turn. Places a block debuff buff and 60% increased defense buff on this champion for 2 turns. So he just helps keep himself alive a little bit better. And if Manai is on his team, removes all debuffs from this champion before placing the block debuffs and increased defense buffs. So, you know, I mean, pretty decent. He can definitely come in there and do some work for you. Next, we're going to be going on to Bellinor and the High Elves, which I was actually a little surprised by. So Bellinor, on his A1, attacks one enemy, places a 30% increased crit rate buff on all allies for 1 turn if the attack is critical. So you do want to build him with some crit, but pretty solid. on his A2 places a 60% decreased defense and 25% weaken debuff for 2 turns on one enemy, then attacks them. So besides getting resisted, you know, he's not hitting weak. He can absolutely get those out there for you very consistently. And places a 60% increased defense debuff on this, or buff rather, on this champion for 2 turns if the attack kills an enemy. That doesn't really work on Clan Boss. On the A3 here, attacks one enemy, will heal this champion equal to any surplus damage the target is killed. Again, doesn't really work on Clan Boss. And the A4 here only works when Xavia is on the same team. But he attacks one enemy, places a 5% poison debuff, a 50% decrease attack debuff, a 30% decrease speed debuff, and a 50% decrease accuracy debuff for 2 turns. Pretty interesting ability. You get a little bit of poison, decrease attack for sure, and speed and accuracy don't really matter on Clan Boss. But if you do have a Xavia on the team, you're playing it on manual, then he can actually come in here and do a fair amount of work for you. And his aura increased ally crit rate in all battles by 24%. Not the best for Clan Boss, but not the worst either. So that is Bellinor. Next, we're going to be looking in the Lizardmen and going on to Fushan. So Fushan here, on his A3, attacks 4 times at random. Each hit has a 50% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. So that's very high chance, plus 25% on the books. So it's actually a 75% chance. And it's hitting 4 times. Very, very likely that you're going to hit it. It is on a 4-turn cooldown, which is a little low, but the rest of his kit as well doesn't do too much for Clan Boss, but the aura actually increased ally speed in all battles by 24%. Is pretty solid for a speed team. You can get in there, help you take some extra turns, and if you're going fast enough, then that 4-turn cooldown may not matter so much. So Fushan, definitely pretty solid. He is an attack champion, unfortunately, but he does rank fairly high on this list because he does bring that aura. So next we are going to be going on to the Undead and looking at Rotos, the Lost Groom. So Rotos on his A1 here attacks one enemy, has a 75% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns, also has a 30% chance of granting an extra turn. So as long as you're just using you want to absolutely max his health out with the A2, but if you just keep using the A1, after that, he is going to keep that decreased defense up for you very consistently and be taking a bunch of extra turns. So Rotos is very solid on this, definitely more so in manual, but definitely very good. His passive here also decreases the damage taken from bosses by 15%. So that is helpful as well, although, yeah, it's 30 only if Siphi is on the same team, and Rotos plus Siphi is absolutely broken. So if you can do that, very strong for a speed team. So he does rank definitely higher on this list because he can keep 100% uptime. I use him on my Clan Boss team, and he is very strong. So I would definitely suggest bringing a Rotos in if you have one. Next, we're going to be looking in the Lizardmen again and checking out Rosin Skaar. So Rosin Skaar on his A2 here attacks one enemy, has a 100% chance when booked of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff and a 25% weaken debuff for 2 turns. It's on a 3-turn cooldown, so very good at keeping those up. Some extra utility in the weaken. He can also remove the Clan Boss's increased attack when it goes into an affinity. So yeah, just decent overall. He's a defense champion, very good base defense, a little bit low speed, but that's okay. Decent base HP as well. So Rosin Skaar is just an overall workhorse. He's great pretty much everywhere in the game, and that includes Clan Boss. So after that, we're going to be going back into the Dark Elves, and we're going to be checking out Foley. So Foley, up until recently, was not considered that great. He was kind of a meme in the community, but now I think he's actually pretty dang solid. On his A1 here, attacks one enemy 4 times, has a 20% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. So that books up to a 25% chance, 4 hits. Pretty good chance you're going to land it, especially since it's an A1, he'll be getting that off pretty often. So definitely pretty solid there. On his A2, attacks 4 times at random, so they'll all hit the Clan Boss. Each hit has a 35% chance of placing a leech debuff for 2 turns. That books up to a 45% chance, 4 times, most likely going to hit. And Leech is absolutely very solid now. It's on a 3-turn cooldown. He could potentially come in and help you replace lifesteal on your team, especially on a speed team where he gets this back around pretty often. And then on his A3 here, doesn't really matter for clan boss, but on the passive, heals this champion by 20% of their max HP and boosts the turn meter by 50% whenever an enemy places a stun, freeze, sleep, or provoke on this champion. So if you can get him to take the stun for you, he can get rid of that, heal himself, pretty solid. You would be losing out on an aura, but if you don't have a great aura anyways, then he can definitely come into that leader spot for you on the Void Affinity and take those hits. I will say it's kind of tough saying to bring him in on a Force Affinity where he would take them, because it's unlikely he would be placing these as often. But, you know, that's just kind of the risk you run. So that's it for Foley. Next we're going to go back to the Lizardmen, and we are going to check out Krisk the Ageless. So Krisk on his passive here is absolutely insane. At the start of each round, places a shield buff on all allies for 2 turns equal to 50% of the champion's max HP. So that's just at the very start of the clan boss fight. Has a 75% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff and a 50% decreased attack debuff on the attacker for 1 turn when hit. That books up to a 100% chance. Absolutely crazy. You can get Master Hexer on him as well and make those go for multiple turns. So it's just absolutely insane. The one thing, I don't think he can be a full-on decreased attack champion just because it relies on him getting hit. So when he comes around to do the stun attack, he may not have a decreased attack on him, but that is a risk you can run if you want to. Otherwise, you could just bring in someone like a Jareg or something to pair with him and just be absolutely solid on both of these. So he's great at this. He also places a 60% increased defense buff on this champion for 2 turns and a 30% increased speed buff on all allies except this champion for 2 turns. So he keeps them moving quick. He's got increased defense on himself. On his A2 here, attacks all enemies, places a 50% ally protection buff on all allies except him for 2 turns. Places 2 15% continuous heal buffs on this champion for 1 turn. Increases the duration of all ally buffs by 1 turn, so you can increase the speed up to 3 turns. And just, it's on a 3-turn cooldown, so you can just keep it constantly going. Krisk is absolutely insane. His A1, the decreased speed doesn't affect clan boss, but he's just a monster. He's definitely coming in here towards the top of this list. And if you have a Krisk the Ageless, you basically have to be running him in clan boss. No other way around it. So next we are going to be going on to the Sacred Order and looking at Martyr. So Martyr on her A1 here attacks 1 enemy, has a 45% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. This books up to a, 75% chance. And she is a counterattack champion, which means she's going to be getting a lot of A1s off. She can keep this up very consistently for you. She brings the counterattack, increased defense on a 3-turn cooldown. Absolutely insane for clan boss. She's definitely one of the best champions in the game. Counterattack is absolutely the meta for clan boss, and unless you're running a super high-end speed team, she's probably one of the best champions you could possibly throw in there. And she actually works really well in high-end speed teams. So Martyr is just absolutely insane. She also brings a decreased attack on her A3. She can't be your main decreased attack per se, but she can absolutely come in as a backup and help you with that. So she's got tons of utility. And her aura increases ally defense in all battles by 33%. Huge aura. Just an absolute monster of a champion. Martyr is definitely coming in towards the top of this list. She is top 3, taking the number 3 spot. And that is just in the decreased defense category. I wouldn't say she would be that low overall out of these champions as far as utility goes. Let's go ahead and go on to the next one. Back in the Lizardmen again. We are looking at Dracomorph. So Dracomorph, again, absolutely insane champion. Attacks 4 times at random on his A2. Each hit places a 5% poison debuff for 3 turns. So just tons of poisons coming out there. Absolutely insane poisoner, and places a 25% weakened and 60% decreased defense debuff on all enemies for 2 turns. So he does that on a 3-turn cooldown. Very good at keeping these up. Very good at keeping poisons up. Works especially well on a speed team. Dracomorph is just an absolute monster. His A1's pretty solid outside of clan boss as well, but he does not bring any sort of aura for you. But that's fine, you don't really want him taking the stuns in the leader spot anyways. He is an attack-based champion, but he has over 1,000 base defense, so not bad. 98 base speed's not bad, little low base HP, 15,000, but still not bad. Even gets a 10 boost to accuracy and a 13% boost to crit damage. This guy is just a monster. And finally, we are going to be going back into the Sacred Order, and like in the Poisoner video, we are ending with Venus. Venus, again, absolutely insane champion. She brings decreased defense and weakened on a 3-turn cooldown on her A2. It's a 100% chance. She is Void Affinity, so she's not going to ever hit weak on this. Just insane. She can be resisted, but that's the only way you can stop it. On the A1, she puts poisons. Each hit on a 2-hit has a 50% chance of placing 5% poison for 2 turns. She's got the HP burn on her A3 on a 4-turn cooldown. And if she's with Cupidus, she can remove all buffs from all enemies and have a 50% chance of granting an extra turn. In Clan Boss, you're probably not pairing her with Cupidus, but that's insane in Arena. And finally, on her aura, increase ally HP in all battles by 33%. Very good aura. So Venus, once again, is going to be topping this list as the best decreased defense champion in the game. So that's it for this time, guys. I hope you find this helpful. If you have any of those champions, definitely be considering using them in Clan Boss. Obviously, take into consideration where they rank. Like if you have an Abyss, she might not be your best option to bring into decreased defense, but she can definitely do it if she is your only option. So thanks for watching, guys. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a comment down below and join the Discord if you have anything you'd like to talk about. Always happy to give advice, talk about anything. If you guys are interested in an account rework or a shard pull in the future, anything like that, make sure to hit me up. And thanks.